Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Muriel Bowser. I am the mayor of Washington, D.C. And this afternoon, I want to briefly address the president's tweets, and then we will take questions. I'm joined today by the Chief of Police, Peter Newsham, the City Administrator for the District of Columbia, Rashad Young. I'm also joined by Ward 6 Councilmember Charles Allen and at-large Councilmember Anita Bonds. I want to be very clear. My police department in Washington, D.C. will always protect D.C. and all who live and visit here. In fact, that is exactly what we did yesterday and last night. No one needed to ask the Metropolitan Police Department to get involved because we were already involved. Our police were doing their jobs from the start. DC police supported uniformed Secret Service last night like we have done literally dozens of times at Lafayette Park. MPD, the U.S. Park Police, and the Secret Service coordinated throughout the evening and night, and at no time was the Chief of Police concerned about losing control of protest activity in Washington, D.C. I want to also be very clear. There is no police department in the nation better prepared to safely support Americans exercising their First Amendment rights than the Metropolitan Police Department, and this is well known. As we go forward, I call upon our city and our nation to exercise great restraint, even while the president tries to divide us. Our nation is grieving the murder of George Floyd and every Black person who has been killed by an unjust and unfair system. We are grieving hundreds of years of institutional racism, systems that require Black Americans to prove our humanity just for it to be disregarded. People are tired, sad, angry, and desperate for change. And we need leaders who recognize this pain and in times of great turmoil and despair can provide us a sense of calm and a sense of hope. Instead, what we've got in the last 2 days from the White House is the glorification of violence against American citizens. What used to be heard in dog whistles, we now hear from a bullhorn. So to everyone hurting and doing our part to move this country forward, we will look to ourselves and our own communities for this leadership and this hope. Our power, we know, is in peace, in our voices, and ultimately at the ballot box. I called us together today for our police chief to provide a situational update, and I'm going to call on Chief Newsham to do that now.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor Bowser, and thank you for your incredible leadership during these extremely trying times in our country and in our city. MPD successfully facilitated demonstrations of over 1,000 people who peacefully marched for miles throughout our city last night. The demonstration route began at 14th and U Street Northwest at about 5 p.m. The group at 14th and U grew to nearly 1,000 people. The activists proceeded to Lafayette Park by way of 14th Street and arrived at about 7 p.m. Along the way, other folks that wanted to participate in the peaceful demonstration did so. And the group we believe exceeded 1,000 people. The group began marching again around 8 p.m. They took Pennsylvania Avenue towards the U.S. Capitol and arrived at around 8:30 p.m. The activists moved to the east side of the U.S. Capitol at around 9 p.m. And at this point, the group began to decrease. 200 people from that group, or 200 or so, returned to Lafayette Park. Approximately 300 from that group continued marching. They took East Capitol Street and Independence on Capitol Hill. There were some splinter groups marching on side streets and merging back with the main group. At about 10 p.m., the group took to the I-695 Southeast Southwest Expressway, and then they proceeded into the 3rd Street Tunnel. They went to our Chinatown area of our city where they disbanded around 11:30 p.m., with some from that group also returning to Lafayette Park. The group in Lafayette Park remained there until 3:45 a.m. With regards to this timeline and this route, I want to caution everybody who's listening. That was the main group. There may have been other splinter groups in other parts of the city during different times, but this is to give you all some sense of the size and the length of the peaceful protests that the Metropolitan Police Department facilitated last night here in our city. MPD did not make any arrests. We did not have any reported uses of force, and we did not have any injuries reported. When the marches ended, a small group of approximately 150 protesters with some agitators remained in Lafayette Park, which, as you all know, is federal jurisdiction for the U.S. Secret Service and the U.S. Park Police. Some of the agitators were throwing bricks and deploying either mace or pepper spray. We established unified command with the U.S. Park Police and the U.S. Secret Service on site, which we do on the multiple occasions when we have these instances of protests in our city. This is the common way we handle this on a very regular basis. The unified command is established so the police departments, the law enforcement agencies, and their federal partners can collectively make decisions on how to proceed. I was in close contact with the MPD incident commander on the scene. The uniformed Secret Service had sufficient personnel to control their line. This is how we always handle these matters in our city, and this is why we are as successful as we are in handling demonstrations in Washington, D.C. There were some skirmishes on the line in Lafayette Park. MPD provided Secret Service with other equipment that they did not have readily available, including helmets. The city streets, as you know, is MPD's primary responsibility. I believe the unified command made good tactical decisions. I have spoken to my counterparts in leadership positions at the U.S. Secret Service, the U.S. Secret Service Uniform Division, at the U.S. Park Police, and they all agree that sound tactical decisions were made. We absolutely value our partnership with our federal partners, and we always stand ready to assist them when needed. As a last note, I do understand that some of the Secret Service Uniform Division officers were injured, and a police officer should never get injured in the line of duty, and I wish them the speediest of recoveries. Thank you.
Let me introduce Councilmember Charles Allen, who represents Ward 6 on the DC Council and also chairs the Council's Committee on Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mayor. I want to thank you, Chief Newsham, and my colleague, Councilmember Bonds, the administrator, and others here. I want to echo the fact, of course, that the District of Columbia is no stranger to major events and indeed major protests. And so we have an expectation, but we also have experience with being able to have that protest take place across our city. And I know that that's something that we all expect. I think it's important to remember, though, as well, as we have somebody from the White House that is just trying to utterly divide people and distract people. There is a lot of pain. There's a lot of grieving that is taking place, not just here in our city, but across the country. And it is important as leaders for us to make sure that we are listening to and respecting and hearing that pain, that we take that pain and we think through action. But we understand that we are looking at a system that is hundreds of years of systemic racism that is something that is playing out. And so I know that I think about this, and I know that all leaders across the district government think about this in terms of how we are working and responding. But at the end of the day, we know we are committed to peaceful protest and protecting that, and making sure that we all understand that protest, it's not supposed to be quiet or polite. Sometimes protest is noisy, it is loud, and that is one of the goals and intentions behind the constitutionally protected right to be able to have your voice heard. And so I know that I'm committed, and know that leaders across the city are committed to making sure that voices across the city will be heard and will be respected. And so I appreciate the work that's going into that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Mayor.
Thank you, Charles. Councilmember? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anita, for being here. And we'll take your questions. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Mayor, there was a Fox News report of a network crew that was chased out of the park very violently. There's video showing what they went through. And they said in the report that when they went a couple blocks away and banged on a window of a police officer trying to get help, but the officer did not leave the wheel. Can you please respond to that and describe to me what the protocol is?
I certainly can, and I'm not aware of any particular complaint against one of our officers, but let me ask Chief Newsham to respond.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that to our attention. As you know, the Metropolitan Police Department would take any type of assault like that very, very seriously. Our role is to protect and to help anyone in our community who's there, protesters, certainly the media who's covering the incident. I would ask that you or your leadership share this particular information with us. As you know, all of our police officers wear body-worn cameras. We'll be able to track down the incident. If the response by the police was in fact the Metropolitan Police Department, we can deal with that. If it was another law enforcement agency, we'll ensure that we pass it along to their internal affairs to be addressed.
Yes.
When there is more than just the usual mutual assistance between MPD and Secret Service, what happens? Is that a request that comes from them, from federal government? How does that mechanism work?
Sure, Chief. If you would describe how we approach this partnership.
So one of the, I talk to police chiefs from across the country all the time. In fact, I was on a call with major city chiefs on Friday with big city chiefs of police from across the country. One of the things that other big city chiefs envy MPD about is our relationship that we have with our federal partners. The way that we deal with these issues when we have large protests or demonstrations occurring in our city, we'll establish what's called a unified command. And what that is, unified command, for those who don't know, it's a place where leaders, decision makers get together and they collectively agree how to proceed to ensure that all of the individual responsibilities of each of the agencies is taken care of. As you know, we have a unique series of jurisdictions here in the District of Columbia. Each of the law enforcement agencies has a unique responsibility. The Metropolitan Police Department overlays most of that responsibility in that we have responsibility for the entire city. We have responsibility for local crime. We have responsibility for any demonstrations that occur in our city streets. And our ultimate responsibility is to ensure that everyone is safe when we have these type of events. Like I said earlier, I have spoken to the leadership of all of those agencies that were involved last night. They are absolutely comfortable with the decisions that were made.
Yes.
Mayor Bowser, I know you gave an opening statement responding to the president's tweets, but can you also, give us your first initial reaction to some of the words used that protesters would be met with vicious dogs, that they had breached the fence? Another comment was made saying that Secret Service were kind of almost excited. I'm not using exact words there, but he expressed that Secret Service members were excited to respond to that. And then just one more thing as well. The president tweeted several times that there was organized protests, and you had mentioned agitators. Is there any information to believe that it was purposefully organized to unfold the way it did last night?
Well, I thought the president's remarks were gross, as I did when he said, if there's looting, there will be shooting. To make a reference to vicious dogs is no subtle reminder to African Americans of segregationists who let dogs out on women, children, and innocent people in the South. Those of us who weren't alive then, we know it well from our history, and many people who were alive then are just shaken that an American president would utter such words about his fellow Americans.
And the
I'm not
comments
finished.
I'm sorry.
The other thing I would say is I don't want to confuse his remarks with the cooperation of law enforcement. And so we know that MPD, Secret Service, and Park Police are there to do a job. They're commanded by professionals, and we expect them to act in a professional way. Yes.
For Chief Newsham, you were talking about the jurisdiction of MPD overlaying the whole city. Does that include the 1600 block of Pennsylvania Avenue that's in MPD jurisdiction? Yes.
So generally down in that area, MPD has responsibility for the street. So last night, the Uniformed Secret Service has primary responsibility for protecting the White House. That is shared with the U.S. Park Police, and we have a responsibility for the street down there. So that's why we established the Unified Command. The Unified Command has worked remarkably well in dozens of other situations. We have protests in this city on a daily basis. To have 1,000 protesters in Washington, D.C. Is not uncommon, and it's a very manageable group. And I keep emphasizing this, that the leadership was very comfortable with the way that happened last night.
And to follow up on that, were there any DC police officers behind the line of the Secret Service last night?
You could potentially have seen our leadership, so you could potentially in images see leadership that is in the Unified Command and their staff. And that's part of the communication process, the face-to-face communication that we need in those situations.
Any other questions? Okay. Elliot? Elliot. We understand that there is a protest planned, a planned protest around Main Justice at the Department of Justice, and we would be prepared for protest activity at other parts of the District of Columbia. The chief, as he mentioned, has already regrouped with his federal partners. He, of course, is working on MPD's deployment strategies. We will work with our federal partners, and we understand that the Park Police has requested some assistance from the National Guard if there is crowd control needed. Seagraves, Mark Seagraves. Mark, I have a job to do for DC residents, and that requires me, and I've said many times, to talk to a lot of people so DC residents don't have to. And I will continue to do that. I have to work with the Congress, I have to work with the White House, and despite any tweets, I'm going to continue to do my job for DC residents. However, feel like these comments are an attack on humanity, and they are an attack on Black America, and they make my city less safe. And we have to call it what it is.
COVID numbers, if that's okay. Today, when you released the trend for the community spread, which had been a daily trend up until today, 12 days, 13, 14, 15, 16, but today, which should have been the 17th day, you are now just categorizing it as greater than 14 days. And I'm wondering why that metric changed today, and if in fact we have reached 17 days of downward community trend.
Actually, Mark, I'm looking at the numbers. I've been very focused this morning on the public safety events, and I haven't gotten my briefing yet on DC Health data, so I'm not going to address that right now.
Okay, and if I could ask Chief Newsham a question. Chief, could you tell us your reaction to watching the George Floyd video and what you have said to your officers with respect to that?
Mark, when I watched that full-length video, which is about 10 minutes long, the only word that comes to mind is sickening. We played that video in our command briefing on Thursday so that all of my command officials and I could discuss how appalled we were by that behavior by those officers. Oftentimes when you have a snippet of video, it doesn't tell the whole story. I think in this instance, that 10-minute clip, there is only one explanation for that behavior, and that was a complete disregard for human life. It's troubling to us in law enforcement who spend every single day building relationships with our community to see that behavior by somebody who wears this uniform. I subsequently sent a message out to our entire police department, our sworn and civilian members, to let them know about how displeased, and I know they are as well, we are with what occurred in our country in 2020. The message that I wanted to express to the officers was that this behavior will be attributed to everybody who wears this uniform. And it's our responsibility as police officers to show, as we do every day, that we are not the type of police officers who would ever be involved in that type of behavior. And that's going to require additional patience. It's going to require additional empathy. And it's going to require additional professionalism by every person that works on this police department. To the extent anyone makes comments that are going to instigate people into hurting others as a result of what we all saw, I am going to have to disagree vehemently with any comment of that kind, because right now in our country, the last thing that we need is divisiveness. We need unity. We need to move forward collectively, collaboratively to a solution that fixes these things and prevents them from ever happening again.
Follow up, you used a phrase there, total disregard for human life. Do you believe that he should be charged with second-degree murder or first-degree murder rather than third? Do you believe there was intent there?
A reporter asked me that question shortly after I reviewed the video, and my sense from watching that video that is nothing less than murder. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Okay. Any last questions? Yes.
The president in his tweets referenced a request that was made to the district last night. Was there a specific request to DC police?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
The president referenced a request that was made last night. What was the request to DC police?
Oh, all of the decisions that are made in an instance like this is made in unified command. A collective decision was made on how to proceed. That's the way we handled it last night and early this morning. That's the way that we will handle it tonight and for any ongoing demonstrations that we have in our city.
And the only DC officers who were behind that line were command officers communicating. They weren't part of holding that line.
We did not have MPD officers involved in the line at the White House. I am convinced that there was sufficient personnel to handle the skirmishes that occurred there.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Wrap it up. Thank you.